like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back and I must tell you that I'm excited. We've got a Major General of the South African Army here, retired, General Johan Jooste. He spent 35 years in the SADF and SANDF. He went all the way, Deputy Chief of the Army, when he retired. And would you believe a man started a new career twice after that? And the one which he became very famous for is his fight against rhinoceros poaching. And I must tell you, I'm very surprised that I actually could say that word rhinoceros, because it's to carefully get my wife to teach me how to say that word in English properly. But sir, you are very welcome here. Thank you for taking the time of talking to us. May I ask you, where do you come from? Were you from a military family that you decided you would go the route of the army?
Chris, thank you, and also for the program and allowing people to share. It's all about adding value. If one can add value, one gladly does so. Because I was born and bred in the Northern Cape, born in a godforsaken little town, Postmasburg, who later became more famous since it was close to the combat training center. And no military family or background. And in fact, after matric, I planned to go study BCom law at the University of Free State, your alma mater. And I asked for exemption because I had a good bursary. So they said I could join the commandos, go study directly thereafter. And then late in matric, I picked up a pamphlet, a brochure, a prospectus of the military academy. Having been stimulated by the cadet system, which I really enjoyed, that just appealed to me. I saw the military and I could study. I came from a poor family, so you could study also. And snail mail, I wrote a little letter, sent it off, and they replied back. And within that November of that year of 1970, the whole report to Heidelberg in Transvaal at the Army Gymnasium in January of 71. And that was the start of the 35-year military career, which to me was an amazing race.
I always ask the officers of your age, sir, were you aware that there was a border war coming? A few young officers been watching North and seeing the changes and knowing that perhaps there is a communist attack or something is going to happen, the army will be needed.
I think so. I think it was almost overwhelming, not the propaganda, but what you were exposed to at the time during informal discussions and what you heard and what you learned from then newspapers or radio news. And one could actually follow some escalation, the Rhodesia thing. Later you hear about the selective involvement here and there. And then by the time we were officer cadets, it was a reality. We knew we would go to war someday. And, you know, at the time we started case studies. We studied Vietnam, apart now from your world wars. But we knew that we would ultimately be operational, and that is why you actually joined. So carefully thereafter, we followed each other's careers to see who has had what operational experience, which is what you all hope for, sadly enough.
I remember looking at the old pictures. I'm something of a historic lover. I've been reading history books since I was 5 or 4 years old. And I recall seeing an admiral with the first premiers, I think Foster, those people, might have been an Admiral Bierman, as the chief of the defense force. And I couldn't understand why a Navy man would control something. The army should have done it. So what I'm trying to say, sir, is it correct if I say to you that the army only came into being the main force, like a senior service, after the Savannah episode? Or that up to then the Navy perhaps and the Air Force was more the thing to go to at the time?
Operation Savannah was a turning point in many instances. Apart from the South African Army and Defence Force realizing how we must equip ourselves and prepare ourselves. Yes, and I think the prominence then being primarily a land war, definitely gave the army the prominence that I think it deserved. Later on, with the jointness, one realized it doesn't realize who or what. If it's a joint defense force, it doesn't matter who the chief of the defense force is. But at that time, landward war, full-scale war, army chief, army person in chief of the defense force.
I'm really glad you say that, sir, because there is a bit of a running battle which I pick up with all my conversations between the different forces. And of course, the army got most of the national servicemen. How do you feel, sir, as a professional soldier about the national service people?
One must really remind oneself of that sacrifice. Yes, it was an honor of that sacrifice. 2 years later on, out of any young person's life, it is profound, the impact that it has lifelong. I'm glad to say that everywhere I meet some of the ex-servicemen, it was a positive experience. That the camaraderie, the experience, the envelope that was opened for them to discover themselves is there. War is the last alternative. That we realize now. One mustn't go to war unnecessarily. There was a war on. That is what we had to do. That is what was expected of us. And the national servicemen were the bulk of that force, 18, 19-year-old, that really set the bar very high as they help us succeed during operation.
I must say, sir, I'm quite astonished at what you people achieved over national servicemen. I mean, you take a lad out of school, and a few months later, he's not only a soldier, he's capable of working with a cannon or a tank or a infantry vehicle. Some of them become junior leaders. How did you do it?
First of all, I think we had excellent training. The officers' corps of the time, we were trained so well, right from tactical level, the academic studies that we could do, the later exposure and senior courses, some international exposure. I really think we were very well prepared as leaders because there's only one thing, you have to lead well. That means you set the example, you maintain a standard of discipline. From discipline comes pride, self-respect and respect. And then honor, then duty, then allegiance to the badge, to the battalion, to the regiment. That is what took us on a road of military success. The best military training in the world. In my second career, I was involved in the armies in about 20 countries. And to this day, if I think of the School of Infantry, I think of all the units and regiments. That is the journey that we could ably take the servicemen on. Again, I acknowledge the sacrifice, their families, and those that paid the price. Every year I attend the service at the Wall of Remembrance here at the Voortrekker Monument. That's something I don't miss. And you stand there and you just reflect on the names that have paid the highest price. And one realizes again, war is a last option. It's a last alternative. But if you go to war, make sure that you play a league that you can win. Make sure that your leadership and your capability and the will to win is there.
Now, General, you were an infantryman, a light infantryman. And I recall the officer commanding of Special Forces, General Bowman, once said to us here at Legacy, an infantry is something you hang something onto. That's an infantryman. What is light infantry, sir? Why is there something like heavy infantry as well?
Because I was fortunate in my infantry career to command light infantry, special infantry, motorized infantry, mechanized infantry, and some elements of airborne. And all of that was just a good experience. What we could achieve, the tasks we were called on to execute. But in my heart, I'm a light infantryman. I will show you a leader on a forced march of 30 kilometers. The way he prepares, the way he sets the example, body aches more than those of the men. To the foot inspection thereafter, I'll show you leadership right there on a forced march. And the joke about hanging things on, hell, we just hang things on, as we get in, and we have soldier systems, and we want to make it more bearable, but inevitably there are more stuff that we hang on to them because they are so flexible. And flexibility is a principle of war. You want the job done, with due respect to all the other cores that we so need and the other services. You want the job done, there's little that the infantry cannot achieve for you. Boots and bayonets, that's in my DNA, light infantry.
And it all got some glory, I suppose. But will you call the border warfare which we had, and I don't want to dwell long on it, a corporal's war, or was it perhaps more a company commander war?
If I think of the time that I spent as officer commanding of 54 Battalion and later then 201 Battalion, I would say none of what you mentioned. We had such good leadership from those days, sector head office, which was a one-star, a brigadier in sector 10 and a colonel in sector 20, through to battalion commanders, where I think we learned how to involve yourself on the tactical level when you had to, but always maintain the bigger picture. Yes, and in the various bases or on deep in patrols, you would have the company commander, and then the junior leaders, the corporal and the lieutenants, that had to do the hard task. I'm talking more now about the area protection and the border protection. And of course, if you look at the more conventional forces like 61 Mechanized Battalion, there also, I think there was just good leadership, and there was at any one time there had to be leadership from the highest, from the battalion commander down to the corporal. And the concept of mission command, the fact that we could teach ourselves mission command, make sure that the intent is clear. Then when a junior leader had to make a decision, chances are very good you will make the right decision and pursue that. The initiative that we allowed them without now fraying out and not sticking to the original objective.
Is there any type of difference in command styles where you deal with a white troop and a black troop? Because a lot of people who's listening here will not know that South Africa had quite a substantial amount of colored troops, if I may use that word, in a non-racist way, of course. But it wasn't just a white army. There were all sorts there, and they all worked together, and all were proud.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we have to acknowledge that. And during my time of operational service, 70-80% of my troops were not white people. You ask if there is a difference. Apart from cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness rather, leadership is leadership. You set the example. You make sure that you communicate well. You are consistent. And then people won't care to listen until you show them you care. You show your troops you care. It doesn't matter who or what they are. Leadership is leadership. You convey yourself differently sometimes. One has got to be very mindful of that. But ultimately, it's about commanding, sound command and control, and in the background, a little bit of resource management. Management is part of it, but specifically leadership.
Does that come by itself, leadership? Can you create a leadership, or is it born?
You can create a leader. Not everybody can. I think there are just people for which it's very uncomfortable. But in the majority of instances, the leaders that I know and what I tried to do myself were a mix of, yes, you have to have some acumen, you have to have some talent, but it was forged through, first of all, your qualifications, very good courses, but that course is about 20%. 40% of the leader you become is experience. How often are you exposed? Do you allow yourself to be exposed? Do you get the opportunity to gain experience? And then 40% is role models. Man, and we had good role models. There is no substitute for it. And maybe in a new era, that is something one must have a close look at. 20% your qualification, 40% the experience that you gain, and it takes so long to get so long experience, and then the role models. And if you were experienced well and you had good role models, your chances of becoming a good leader is just exponentially better than maybe the next man.
While I was listening to everyone here, it came to me that the officer corps were extremely well trained. I remember speaking to General McGill, Alexander, the paratrooper, and he came in late because he came from the reserve force. And he said to me I had to do all these courses, all of them, just after he did the military academy, just to catch up with his contemporaries. Do you think this helped you in civilian life?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Maybe you should get retired Brigadier General J.D. Malan on at one time to talk about the application of the principles of war in civilian life. Because when you get out of the military, there's a bit of a culture shock. An American friend of mine said the worst of it was the first morning, he got into the back of the car and the thing didn't move. Now, it wasn't like that for us. We were not really entitled. You go into a total different environment. Best you take your pips off your pajamas. I landed in an international company. They gave me a BlackBerry. Those days, a smartphone, you had a BlackBerry and a laptop, and some guidance on what I had to do. But inherently, your experience kicks in, your discipline, the ability to understand, to conceptualize, to see the bigger picture, to make your contribution. Nothing beats the military and the way we were trained, no matter what task in life you get. And I am aware of functional competence. You've got to learn. But also we were used to that. You constantly learn. When you get into civilian life, all of that just kicks in, and it makes not for a soft landing, but a very sure-footed landing.
You know, sir, when we record here, I always think of who's coming after us who will be listening here, which is one of the reasons why we do the legacy interviews, conversations, so that those following us can perhaps learn. And they might not understand the terminology, and they might not know any more about the old SADF and the SANDF. So I have to ask you, sir, I recall I read a book about Moshe Dayan. I think it was an Israeli officer, one eye, it's only one eye. Wonderful man. And he made a statement, sir. He said that he went to a course in England, I think to Sandhurst, and they issued him with an orderly. But he had no idea what this guy was supposed to do for him. Was it the same in the South African army, sir? Would the general be treated like some kind of a god or something? Or was he just a normal man doing a hard job?
I can honestly say that we had no entitlement. General Viljoen, the late General Viljoen, set that example. You sleep with the troops, you march with the troops, you live with the troops. In normal peacetime, we were not driven around unless it was ceremonial or unless it was urgent. We didn't travel with personal staff officers to take minutes or to carry your bags. We were really intentionally not dependent on any unnecessary support that would mean cost, and that would create the wrong impression, as if you are supposed to be better treated like anybody else. I'm very comfortable that in that instance, we always still set the example. One must not underestimate the example that is set. That because you closely watched. We forget how the subordinates and the troops and the juniors watch us. They watch your daily move, from why you laugh, why you're angry, why you're irritated. Right through.
I know something of General Viljoen because his sister is my sister's mother-in-law. So I met the general quite a few times, but so I never had the guts to ask him why they call him Stofstreepie. So can you tell me why did they call him that? And I'm trying to translate this into English now. Dust cloud, I suppose.
Yeah, a little puff of dust. He was a short person, strongly built, but a short person, and on top of that, he just moved. And you wouldn't find him getting into your unit and it's a walkabout or a strollabout. It was, you walk from point to point, you see what he must see, make his remarks, and back and in. It was there was pace to it. And jokingly people say, and lovingly and affectionately people say, this short guy, you want to walk with him, you move because he's in a hurry.
General, since we're speaking about Stofstreepie, General Constant Viljoen, I think he was the chief of the Defence Forces in the middle 80s. And then his career, according to me, came to a bit of a halt. At the same time when Special Forces officer Wynand de Tooy and his team ran into trouble and Wynand was captured. I think another 3 of them died that day. Very sad. We're working on speaking of the survivors of that patrol. They have a lot to say what actually happened that day. But that is not for now. What I need to know, sir, had that any influence upon General Viljoen's army career? And at the same time, sir, did it happen that the politicians were starting putting pressure on senior officers?
I'm not aware remotely that it had an impact. If I look at the age then and the retirement age, for those, that generation was 55, I was not aware really as a junior at all that that impacted it negatively. As far as political oversight is concerned and the minister and his involvement, yes, we were aware even as juniors that played a big role. And that if you want to become a general, it's not so unique to South Africa. You want to become a general, I jokingly sometimes said, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. It is part of it. And we were the generation, middle 90s, that had to become used to civilian oversight. Now it's not only your own minister. Now it's the Secretary of Defense and his staff and the Portfolio Committee. And I dare say we lived through that well also, accepting it. But I'm not saying that during our time there was undue interference. There was close oversight, and at times one could have felt irritated that this is a functional, tactical, or operational matter. Allow me to do my work.
Should a senior officer expose himself? I recall General Viljoen walking around with an R4. That's why I remember it. R4 rifles at those stages were not really out yet. And I think he got blown up by a landmine or something on his rattle. And I also know that he got himself involved with the attack on Kasinga. He was also there. He was actually removing his ranks so they couldn't identify him as a senior man. How far does that go, sir? How far would you go to be with your men and where you know you shouldn't be with your men? And this is not a dig at General Viljoen at all. Please don't, any of you, don't put words in my mouth here. I'm just asking.
There's only one criteria where you place yourself during battle. You place yourself on where you can influence it best. It might be a bit forward, it might be to a flank, it might be on high ground, it might be in a certain vehicle that is well equipped. I think one must be careful to be lured into overexposure that might serve your own conviction, that now you also experience the fire and the cordite and the dust. And I don't think subordinates expect it of you. The risk attached to it, in my humble opinion, must weigh heavily before you make a decision to join the assault troops.
I want to go now to the answer. In 1989, I'd been a young sergeant in the police. I've served 5 years by then. I wanted to be in the police. It was a deliberate choice because I grew up in Katima Mulilo and in Namibia, and I saw the police camo uniforms. It looked more sexy to me, sir, than the army. Of course, what do we know? But anyway, we had the feeling that the end is coming. I was recruited to Flak Plaas, to C1. We had a fair idea what was happening there, to be honest. And the way they did the recruitment was very, very strange. You know, a senior officer would come and talk to you. They definitely had a viewpoint on you. You don't just volunteer. You have to be recruited. And I recall my brother then was working as a national serviceman. He was recruited out of the army into the police as a Lotelim. because he was already an advocate. And he said to me, stay away, security police headquarters are burning files. And of course I stayed away, thank God I did. But was there any feeling in the army, sir? Did you people understand that after Tutu Carnival and with Namibia now becoming independent, that things will change in South Africa as well?
Personally, and I might say officially, yes. We knew, we could see politically, diplomatically, one could see the bigger picture. And again, we had sound leadership. There was never any doubt that we are there to protect. Our orders, our instructions came from a political leadership and we execute them. But we could also see how, let's say, the mood or the view or circumstances changed. And I'm proud to say that us who has been in operations, that has been to war, could understand that under the leadership of then General, the late General Malan and other, us who had won the war, some people would say we didn't, could now win the peace, could make that transition, which is, to my mind, an ultimate victory for a soldier. It doesn't come naturally. And how our Department of Defense at the time, actually set the tone in South Africa with, let's say, transformation. I don't like the term, but embracing a new dispensation and making it work without any sacrifice of military ethics or effectiveness or professionalism, and also remaining apolitical. Under the leadership of, like, General Meiring and our leadership at the time, we could move into a new era, follow up on the war that was behind us, understanding there is a future to build here.
Was that not a strange feeling to you, sir? Because all your life, basically, I mean, you enlisted in what, 1971, you spent 3 years at the military academy, 74, now comes Havana. The war is going on. Now there's no war anymore. Is that a strange feeling?
It was unreal. And if I might cite a specific example, so one of the battle groups that I fed from South African Infantry Battalion was some of the last involved in heavy fighting on the boundary with Angola when they tried to overturn the agreement at the time. Now everybody come back. I come to Pretoria, a young colonel wanting to do things. And I asked the director of operations what I do now. And he said to me, your one company will go to Mamelodi and your one to Atteridgeville. And I couldn't believe it. And now we had to learn and talk about positioning yourself forward. Because so I came to Pretoria, to Mamelodi. We stayed on top of a hill near the reservoir, and I had to learn myself what to do now. We had the pre-deployment training, and all of a sudden, it's like a bank manager trying to manage a mine. But again, we embraced it, and we could, within all the parameters and all the pressure, make sure that we were a successful and professional peacekeeping force. That was the pre-runner of the peacekeeping force that you did there. And if I may, I just remember that the first evening in Mamelodi, going to bed, it was 10 o'clock, and I heard the sea, and I realized, my gosh, some people are only coming home now. And the next morning, shortly after 3 course, I heard the sea again. They were leaving. And all that we lived through there prepared us to understand that there are two South Africas, that we've been, and I'm not trying to be politically correct, that we've been effectively isolated through circumstances from a very big part of our country and our people. So it served that purpose also. It was a great transition. And then, of course, thereafter, the big transformation. Now we must cut back an army, a defense force of 100,000 to 70,000. We just embarked upon that. Then they say you must integrate 25,000 non-statutory forces. And you must explain that every time. But once again, discipline helped, a cognitive ability, a conceptual thinking ability to see the bigger picture and still to lead well and remain as professional as you can.
You know, sir, you have a very good point here. I always say to the people on this show, and there's some of you who disagree with me, I have no fear of a South African National Defence Force whatsoever. When I drive around in Bloemfontein and I see the rattles and I see the the paratroopers and I see the infantry guys, they look like soldiers, they look good, they look like soldiers. I can't give a higher accolade than that. I have no fear of them. I don't think they're going to try and shoot me or do something to me. I cannot say the same of the police. And that to me is the test. And if you worked in Africa and other parts of the world and you see the rubbish they have there, dressed in military gear, standing there with AK-47, you do have a fear for these people. You don't know. And I also say to people, South Africa is one of the greatest and best disciplinary records during national key piecing in Africa anyway, than any army in the world. It's better than the French army. I'm not just saying these things, I have evidence of this. So how would you respond to people who just, the past war is better and the new is just rubbish, blah, blah, blah. But you must have felt this criticism as well.
Indeed, the criticism, and some people would say you naive, which to an extent I am personally. One must be very careful for meaningless comparisons. It cannot be the way we had it. It must not be, by the way we had it. The fact that in this defense force we chose to build a conventional defense force, you refer to our track record on peacekeeping in Africa. 3 weeks ago, they ended the biggest exercise at the combat training center, 13,000 people involved in more than a decade. Is it exactly the same? It's not. Do we have critical mass? I believe so. We can build on what we have. And then my test is any organization must have the ability to self-correct. And if I dare say that's the difference with the defense force. The defense force has enough critical mass to self-correct and to grow. I don't see deterioration. The fact that they're so badly under-resourced is a political decision that I'll say nothing about. It's a great pity that with what we have there, the leader corps that we built, we run the risk. I cite one example. My daughter also went to the military academy and they had their 20-year reunion last year. So they're off to the military academy, get the necessary permission. She called me that first Saturday afternoon. She couldn't stop talking about the professionalism, about what she see there. I phoned Prof. Abel Estreisen. I said, Abel, talk to me about academic standards. Are we doing well? I get confirmation. I phoned the commandant, then 1-star of the military academy. I said, I'm sorry, I'm an old-timer. I have to report to you this positive notion. And the way he reacted and the way we could communicate, if we build on that, for instance, and we follow up with pure military training, with competencies, and later on knowledge, skills, and attitude, I cannot see why our defense force can grow from where we are. And I agree with you. Let's be careful. Let's look around. Let's maintain a perspective around it to see the bigger picture and the full picture about a defense force that is still intact, that is apolitical, and that is doing the best they can with the resources they have.
Well, that is exactly, I think, the point. I also have no fear of a South African National Defence Force ever staging a coup d'etat. I just don't see it happening. It cannot happen.
Absolutely.
But so, what was the feeling in the officer corps when President de Klerk came after the 3 generals, or was it 4 generals, I believe here, 93 around, just before, after the disbanding of 3-1 and 3-2 battalion? How did you people take that? Because even for me, I was a student at university and I felt this was unnecessary.
It was very uncomfortable. And of course, we didn't discuss it often. Once again, professionals, stick to your guns. To me personally, that whole affair, even if it was then to serve some purpose, some bigger picture, I to this day, I cannot accept it. And then what is more, the way the Defence Force was, in my humble opinion, just marginalized. We didn't even have our own minister. You share the portfolio of Minister of Defence with another portfolio. I thought that was very detrimental. It was wrong, and it served a personal objective or opinion or intent. It was not a good time. We knew that the war was over. Of course, we had to take some sort of backseat. Of course, it was an internal, almost civil war then, and civil unrest. That was not the problem. The problem was the acknowledgement, the opportunity to make the proverbial difference, the way our leaders were treated with respect. That sat very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it left a very bad taste. It is one of those things which I think could have been dealt with differently. You don't need to humiliate a senior officer ever. What people forget is these are honorable people. Just look at their marriages. They married forever. That's the other strange thing about the South African Army senior officers. All of them say to me, got a wife here, 50 years marriage course. But they all say these things as if, it's just normal to them. I mean, you could have asked these people just to resign. I mean, why make these silly points?
Yeah, absolutely. It was short of tragic. And still, of course, we stuck to our guns. We worked through it still, simply because one knows the intent, one understands the implications, and one is committed with the people under your command, to do the task at hand.
I was astonished, sir, when I became an attorney and I worked at Mandela's law firm. And we met quite a few people, obviously from the other side, because the law firm I was working at then was known in the old days as a terrorist law firm. They represented from Mr. Mandela from the 1960s right through. You name them, and these were like clients. We were not good paying clients, I have to say. They never paid their bills, but
I can imagine.
Yeah, no, it's a hard thing. And I remember meeting a few MK members and others as well, sir. And it was friendly. There were common courtesy and respect, and there were no hatred. Can you say the same of meeting the opposition officers for the first time and then working with them?
I can indeed, and let me cite an example, if I may, because I was the officer commanding of the Army Gymnasium, newly established leader training unit in a post-conscript era and in a post-war area. And I got a phone call from Pretoria to say, we have 100, 200, 300 newly appointed officers that has to do induction orientation. The guidelines were scampy. People were so busy. There were so many pressing issues. So in 1995, I did the first course of 40 such officers. And I think we did about 8 of them. So there we were, a rank group from major to colonel, people reporting for the course. The first course it was attended by the late General Jackie Sidibe, the wife of the minister then. She was a lieutenant colonel. And I remember, it's customary in our army then that on a Sunday evening, the officer commanding go walk, the lines go through the officers' mess or the NCO's mess to greet people that reported for the course. And it was like ice. I walked in there, some people didn't even look up. They unpacked their clothes. So the next morning, I opened the course officially. And it was still very strenuous. And I briefed the officer instructors how we must go about it. Let's make sure that we remain professional and open and engaging. And then it's also customary that on the first evening of the course, we all joined at the officer's mess for a drink, a soft drink or a drink. And part of that was introducing yourself. And like soldiers, you normally say, I've been involved operationally here and that operation. And I thought all day, what would I do? And I just did what I always did. And everybody rose, talked there straight where they were, and that broke the ice. And what really was touching is how they would appreciate the basics. I personally taught ethics and the art of war on the course. And it was a short course, but it was really meant to make them at home in a defense force. And I remember the first pay sheets. They said they want to see me. And they said, what is this here? You give me money, you take off. This is another one of the tricks. I remember I did also officer etiquette because it's sensitive. You don't want to lecture the guys. They've trained all over the world. And I said, okay, but you can read the book. They say, wait a little bit. We're back in the officers club this evening. Tell us all these knives and forks and things. What's the right thing to do? That was humbling to me to this day, to your point of good people, of soldiers being of the same breed all over the world, yes, I can vouch for that. And that course, I dare say, really opened up a lot of good avenues of good communications, simply of mutual trust and respect at the Army Gymnasium over a period of 2 years. The General Romano, whose deputy I later was, qualified on that course. A number of the generals today qualified on that course. Good experience.
Well, you know, so I have a highest admiration for the staff course people, because I can tell anybody that diesel in your auto, that ammunition, that toilet paper, those rantsoene, they don't just arrive. People actually plan these things out. So that is fantastic. I have to ask you now, sir, when after you left the army or you retired, you then went and worked for BAE Land Systems. I suppose that's the old Denel. It's one of the things they sold out or sold off. Or was it the original UK company?
Of course, no, it's a PLC, publicly listed company in London, and I work for the ink part of it, the American leg of it, with a headquarters first in Houston and later in Washington, DC. I worked for 2 years in a small company, and it was not by design, maybe a little bit by default. That taught me to be a civilian and to accept how civilians go about it. And then the 5 years with BAE Systems in Benoni. And of course, I remember initially I was hesitant, and we often had to go to the US to Houston, to head office for planning. And the first times I thought, yeah, Jooste, you've got to get your act together here. And then I realized we're on par. We can play that league. I was fortunate to really travel the world. I would do business at any one time, or prospective business, in 12 countries, from Japan right through to Brazil, up to Canada, into Africa, up in Sweden. And I'm not exaggerating. And one could learn a lot about diversity. And I jokingly always say, I take a South African group of engineers, I give them 6 months and 5 million rand, and we want a solution, they'll bring it. You try that anywhere else, even in the US, they talk $5 million maybe in 5 years. I was very proud of what we achieved there, and the armament that we could send into the world. That firm was about a 4 billion rand firm at one time, creating more than 1,000 jobs in Benoni. And now in a little factory in Benoni, we could fly vehicles out straight to Iraq and straight to other places where transactions were authorized. It was all in all a good experience. And I always remember also that whenever we were in meetings or work sessions and people didn't know me, I thought, well, now I'm cool. I'm laid back. And then the first tea break, somebody will come to me and say, were you in the army? So that I've accepted to this day. That's in your DNA, accepted. Either they look at your short hair or at your shoes that are shining or your mannerisms. It was a privilege, the second career, good leadership, world-class armaments, very, very proud South African engineers and other staff.
I have to agree to you with you, sir, because we had some test flight engineers and other engineers here on the program, and they all say the training of the South African institutions, as well as the Air Force or Army, whatever way we were, is head and shoulders above any other institution anywhere in the world. And they say they prove this. They live in Canada, US, you call it, and they've been there. So you would have seen a lot of the other armies as well, sir. Can we be proud?
We can justly be proud. That was my main job, to make contact with those armies and defense forces, to indirectly give advice, see the trends of conflict and associated technologies, and come back home and advise on that. And that would give the marketers also the cue on where to go market, and the engineers what is required in the field. One could really be trusted. I recall UAE, where I was invited to that island there for special forces there. You don't get there. And I have this big dagger to this day that the general gave me. And he was a 1-star. I was a two-star. I was a civilian, man, a smos. And yet, I was the general, and we sat in his office, had his officers lined up, and he presented it. That's one of many experiences one had also, apart from now creating wealth, making the company targets.
I think we have to agree. We have to agree. And I know that because once again, people do contact me here. And there's really a lot of foreigners, as we would call them, buitenlanders. In other words, those who are not South African, who actually says to me they are astonished about the caliber of people which we speak to. And they're convinced that I pick and choose them, and I don't. We grab whoever we can get hold of and who's willing to talk to us. So how did you get to the rhinoceros? Because that's the reason why we actually want to talk to you. I mean, what happened?
I am humbly proud and thankful mostly. It's amazing grace that I could reinvent myself twice. I was 60, it was 10 years ago. I exited from the company. And Rhino and I were sitting at the Vaal River near Paris. And we discussed what forward. We knew that I still wanted to work, but scaling down. That was our framework. Scale down, get something. And there were an option of two. And then at an infantry association lunch, Marius Roos, who was a reserve force colonel, talked to me. He said, "What are you going to do?" He says, "I have something." Cut a long story short, that is how Sandparks offered me a 5-year contract. Initially as a consultant or advisor, and then Dr. Mabunda in his wisdom said, "No, you become the chief ranger. You go take over that ranger corps." I spent 3 years in Kruger, get dust on the boots, with all the challenges there that is well described in the book Rhino War. I then for 2 years worked at the head office of Sandparks with the other national parks, specifically the 6 rhino carrying parks. Then the late minister insisted that I help the provinces. We all know at provincial level in our country there's huge erosion, which I subsequently did. And for the past 3 years, I've been involving the private sector. They own more than half the rhino in South Africa. So again, what a privilege, how this evolved and the difference one could make. And it's 10 years into the third career. I can just say amazing grace. And, specifically again, when you're 70, you want to make a difference. Badly want to make a difference if you can. And just on that point was the average person that I work with is 2 decades or a quarter of a century younger than me. I've learned to manage millennials. What an exciting lot. One of their main subjects they missed, which was work. Apparently that was not a main subject that they were taught. And I jokingly always say to it, I have learned in the process, it's up to you to manage your shelf life. If you're 50 in this world, you become Timex very fast. Unless you create yourself, unless you're a CA or a surgeon, you will be accepted if you make yourself acceptable. Platinum status is not going to become popular. The world is young, but there is place for wisdom, experience, and some solid input into practices, best practices that also evolve and change with time, but where the basics remain the same. I learned to manage my shelf life, and am thankful for the opportunity to make a difference and still be seconded to a department also.
Why were the poachers murdering all the rhinoceros? And I just want to say to people who's never seen a crime scene like that, it's brutally ugly. Because they shoot the poor animal, they murder it there, and then they cut the horn off and they're up. It's not for meat. There's no need. They don't want to eat it. It's just greediness.
Of course, yeah, it comes back to money, the supply and demand. The consumer countries at that stage, mostly Vietnam, we'd say today mostly Chinese, but also some other countries in the region where you live now. And how they did it was just swamping us. Kruger, one can compare to Ukraine today. And everybody wanted to help, had an opportunity. Some helped, some gave up hope somewhere to start off with. And there we were at one stage losing 3 animals a day. We would fly in with a helicopter, and right there on an area smaller than a rugby field, we'll find 3 carcasses. Then the barbarism attached to it. Sometimes they shoot with a small caliber rifle because they couldn't get a heavier 4.58 or the other hunting rifle. The animal is just dazed. It's not dead. So they'd walk closer, don't want to fire another shot because it alert the rangers, cut the back with the panga and chop off that horn. And that animal takes 3 days to die. Only the head moving a half a meter into the ground. The same with the calves. Now the calves very bravely try to defend the mother. So they wouldn't shoot it again, another shot. So he gets the panga as well. And that just went on and on and on. It took us 3 years to stabilize that runaway train and work to where we are today, where it's a lot more of a total solution, looking at alliances, looking at neighboring countries. How do we resource this? What do you do in terms of demand reduction? And how do you manage the rhinos that you have well so that you have good breeding?
Wie's perpetrators, wie's criminals? Were they ex-military trained, sir? Would they have been fighting in their own wars, perhaps? And now out of poorness come across the border into the Kruger and commit these offenses against nature?
Of course, thank you for that question. The average poacher is between 18 and say 45. They're destitute. They have no option. They are part of that hundreds or thousands of people that are jobless, that live destitute in dry, dusty areas around Kruger, either in Mozambique or inside. They don't have technology. They will have the hunting rifle that is issued to them, and if they lose it, there's hell to pay. Some don't have a silencer, so they would take the shock of a car and make a makeshift silencer just to muffle the sound a little bit. They would carry a rucksack. In the rucksack, maybe a few pals and some fish. And here and there, a bit of alcohol or drugs. Telltale, you'll find around their wrist and around their waist the buckskin, because they were blessed by the Sangoma and they're invisible. Likewise with the rifle, nobody can see the rifle. They are in tatters in terms of clothing. Second-hand North Star tackies and tatters of clothes. They would walk into that park 25 kilometers at last light, lie low, see the water, see what the rangers does, talk to their informants, unfortunately also, and then the next day or the day thereafter, late afternoon, shoot and run. It takes them minutes to cut off the horn. If you know how the hardcores, cut it off with a knife. The other exit. 3 of them run. The one with the rifle, the one with the rucksack, and the one with the axe. That's the standard grouping. No technology. Yes, they carry mobile phones. And initially when we caught them, arrested them, you would look at this, at what is on the phone. Later they would swallow the SIM card if you arrest them. And today there's nothing on that SIM card other than one call that you can follow up on. How they survive and how they do it here and there, one cannot but acknowledge it hesitatingly and begrudgingly so. But it is unnecessary, it is brutal, and one mustn't forget, it's supply and demand. The money that they get, if those 3 of them get back, they can get a checkers bag with between 100 and 200,000 rand on mark notes. And that's small. From where I sit now in Pretoria, 50 kilometers from here, radius, the real brains sit. And those horn come mostly here, a little bit down to Durban and a little bit to Maputo. So you've got to collapse the network. And that is why my grand strategy was clear the park from the outside. It's like the layers of an onion. You start in the consumer countries, work your international networks, you come onto the continent, in the region, in your own country, adjacent parks and communities, and even inside. You've got to fight the war from within with corruption that plays a significant role.
So it seems to me, sir, that you're up against syndicates. This is criminal. This is not terrorism.
It's organized crime. It's organized crime, and many people at that time left the CIT and other crimes because this was quite low risk and the returns were extremely high. A normal set of horns, good horns, 6 to 7 kilogram, and that runs into millions. You could get 3 million rand for that. And later on, when we started dehorning, they will kill for the stump because that stump also is 100 or 200 or 300,000 rand still. It is sad that a dead rhino in their eyes has become more worth than a live rhino, and that it was commoditized, and that it is allowed in the consumer countries, international networks, and local crime networks. What is done in the park, bravely so, with all the mistakes that are made, has to be complemented with collapsing of networks. And then the political and diplomatic efforts in the consumer countries.
Are these people dangerous? If they run into a ranger group who's tracking them or perhaps want to arrest them, would they start shooting?
Yes, even at the helicopter. And specifically once they have the horn, they're very aggressive. And no discretion, no nothing. We'll just flip around, fire shots, and yes, it is high-risk situations. At one stage, we had 3 firefights a week in that park, which is more than during our bush war, which placed a high strain on the Ranger Corps and their families.
Are the Ranger Corps able to do this? Do they have the equipment and the training and the weapons?
We built arguably the best anti-poaching unit on the continent. Yes, we were quite well resourced. I made it my business, and in 4 or 5 years, I could muster 400 million rand for what is required there. Those 400 brave rangers I compare to light infantry. I'll take them to war. They unsung. They're in the bush. Not many people want to be in the bush. Them and their families live this life day in and day out, subjected to social media, subjected to the approaches of other criminals. And one must remember, in the case of a firefight, you have to prove afterwards that it was self-defense. And that happens at night. You see the glitter of that rifle barrel and the shots are fired. It immediately becomes a crime scene. White and red tape, fly in the police, confiscate the rifle, and the murder docket is open. Now, this poor man and his family must wait till the Attorney General makes a decision. And to this day, we've had no court case. And of course, no conviction, which is heartening. That's good training, good rules of engagement, and good military and legal advice to the Rangers. I was blamed many times that I've over-militarized the thing. And I just say, I hear accolades all around for the Rangers. You all praise them. So what I must do, I must train them well, equip them well, and lead them well. And if in that training you want me to send them up against armed gangsters without military tactics and techniques, it's paramilitary, not military. We don't operate in sections, platoons, and companies. It's paramilitary. You need that to make sure that you come out best in those close-up contacts.
Would there be something like a female ranger, or are they all male?
No, of the 22 section rangers at one time, 4 were female. And I have a lovely, not a lot of them, they run into 10s. At one stage, the psychologist that we employed to look at the unfusing later advised me that 2 female rangers had to be withdrawn from action. They've just seen too much, too many people, too many corpses, rhino carcasses. And I went to that ranger post, got them in and said, thank you, you've done so well, let's give you a break. And they refused. They stayed back there. Now there are female rangers doing a good job with the male counterparts.
I know you wrote a book on this, Rhino Wars. And is there anything, that's my question to you, sir, is there anything we listening here, what we can do to assist?
I often talk, have the past 10 years. At one stage, I was accused that I'm media flirting. It was too important to leave it to anybody else. I communicated to myself around the world. I had 2 fallouts, one with Carte Blanche and half the one with the London Times. in all the past 10 years. And it's high risk. Remember, you say something wrong, the minister will fire you. If there is a message that I convey throughout the world, is that the world has Rhino because South Africa saw to it that we have Rhino. And I'll be doing a speech again on Thursday. And you ask about the message. Please do your best to become a Rhino ambassador. First of all, be knowledgeable as you can. And let's just convey the facts, because just now it's doom and gloom. Second, Brandy, job's not even done and we're all so negative. Avoid negative people. They have a problem for every solution. And we are in trouble. There's no doubt about it. So become a Rhino ambassador. Maybe you have the means. Maybe you have somebody that you can influence. Maybe you have a political ear. As long as we've interacted and the opportunity that you've created now, we go from there and as best we can, make sure that the facts are communicated, and then if there's support to muster that is on your path, that support is mustered.
I think we can summarize what you just said by just living your motto, your creed of adding value, whatever you do.
You add value, and then what has served me well, and I write about that in the book also, was think big, start small, act now. Think big. There's always a bigger picture, and don't inhibit yourself. Start small. No analysis paralysis. Don't wait for the perfect. Don't be solely, but you start small. Just start, and then act now. More often than not in life, you'll regret not acting than maybe acting not totally correct. And Rhino War is meant to be a message of hope also. It's a reality check, but it's a message of hope. We're talking about our heritage, and our wildlife is a paramount, vital part of our economic engine. Tourism is for Africa to utilize, to create wealth. And so if the heritage part does not really resonate with you, what about the economic engine? And we're so endowed in South Africa, a partner from Kruger, right all over the country.
Where can we get hold of this book? And I will put the links in the description also. So we'll expect you people to go and look at the description. Please get hold of this book if possible.
In South Africa, you can buy it from bargain books and exclusive books, and also on Loot if you want to do online. Internationally, our book, hard copy, ebook, and audiobook is on Amazon. Easy to get. The hard copy book, even they deliver within 3 days. And of course, the ebook you buy and you have it immediately.
I've noticed, I've done some research here, General, and there are 2 covers. This is one international and the other one local. And are they the same books? Should we buy both?
Yeah. No, they're exactly the same, because we were fortunate with the reputation of Tony Park, who's written 20 novels in Africa. Having written the book, Pan Macmillan upfront bought the South African or the Southern African rights. So there they go. Tony himself, because he's so knowledgeable and nippy in the industry, launched the Amazon, and we changed the cover for that. And also in the international one, there's not the photos. In our book in South Africa, there are a couple of photos around about the middle of the book.
The last question, sir. What does it take to be a ranger? If there's some young man or young woman here, they think they like a life in the bush, what do they need?
I take it in this instance, we talk about the anti-poaching ranger. Remember, normally rangers, it was demanding. There were hardship because you live in the bush, it's dangerous, you're remote. But the anti-poaching ranger, first of all, well, I always ask them, what do you do in your free time? Now, if your free time, you do TV, that's fine. If you do reading, that's fine. If you are not inclined outdoors, you will set yourself up for failure. That's almost primarily. And then it might sound a bit naive, some affinity, some love, some realization with nature and our resources and our fauna and flora. For the rest, these days, they are selected like more than infantry. I want to say special force. You go to the wildlife college and you do a selection, it's a serious selection, right down to the 2,4, because that is what is required if you want to be deployed in active duty as an anti-poaching ranger. We don't need super people, super attitude, average abilities, the rest we'll take care of. If your attitude is there, we'll take care of the rest.
I just want to make you attend, all of you here, that the General here is speaking to us as a human being, as a South African citizen, and not as a representative of any other organization. Is that true, sir? You're speaking to us here only as an individual, as a man.
Because indeed, I'm doing this in my personal capacity as Johan Jooste. I serve on the board of NGOs. I am seconded to a department still. What I've said here is my personal opinion, and I stand by it.
Well, Internet, we've come to the end of this program, and I must tell you, I've enjoyed this tremendously. I've learned a lot. Thank you, General. We really appreciate you. And thank you for all what you've done as well, the positive vibe. I myself don't like negative people. I'm actually scared of negative people. They bring down an entire unit. I would always get rid of a negative one as quickly as possible. He would either become positive or he would cry for his mom. But he's not going to stay negative. So to the rest of you, please come and tell us your stories. Don't think you are unimportant. Every single officer I was speaking here will tell me, Chris, we needed the cooks, we needed the chefs, we needed the guys in the personnel dienskorps. We need all of those people. It's a massive finger army. It's not just, the guys on the front line doing the shooting. So if you have a story, don't let anybody tell you you are unimportant. That is Satan talking. That's not true. You were not unimportant, but you're not unimportant for us here at Legacy or your comrades which you served with. So please come and talk to me, get hold of me, and to the rest of you, until we meet again, God bless.